There are so many historical myths, it's not even funny. It's just annoying. In the early 11th century, Canute the Great was King of England, Norway and Denmark, and he's remembered as the most effective king of his age. A lot of people believe a bizarre story about him. It goes like this. Canute was so drunk on power that he attempted to command Mother Nature. He went down to the beach and demanded the waves stop crashing into the land. He demanded the tide turn around, but of course the tide kept rising on the beach, and he looked dumb. In reality, this never happened. There are no reliable records of it, and in the original story, he was making the point that no man can command nature. French military history isn't actually bad. When you compare it to British military history, it does look quite poor, but compared to most other countries, it's very good. They won a lot more battles than they lost, and France has always been a major European power. Even at their low points, France was able to put together powerful armies. French power was dwarfed by Germany immediately after its unification. In 1870, Germany went to war with France and defeated them in a matter of months. That defeat was the origin of questioning French military records. The Dark Ages weren't that dark. What I mean is that it wasn't that bad compared to the ages immediately before and after it. The Dark Ages began with the fall of Rome. Without Rome, living standards fell and Europe descended into a terrible anarchy. That's why it's called the Dark Ages. It's common to believe this, but it's not actually true. It's called the Dark Ages due to a lack of records from the time, so we don't know much about it. What we do know is that it wasn't that bad. Life expectancy was about the same as before, and living standards had actually risen. That's partly because charity work was a common sight. Nazi efficiency is a myth. It's generally believed that Nazi Germany was an incredibly efficient country, which would explain their developments in military science. Some say it was the most efficient country in the world, but really it wasn't. Their bureaucratic system was chaotic. They wasted money on agencies which had no need to exist. In Nazi fashion, officials would stab each other in the back for personal gain. That kind of thing isn't good for productivity. It was a total mess. The only reason they kept the war going for so long is the lengths they were willing to go to. At one point, 30% of their war effort was funded by Holocaust loot. Almost everything you know about the birth of Jesus is a myth, or at least, there is no actual evidence to support it. First of all, he wasn't born on December 25th. It's thought he was born in autumn, and early documents don't mention December 25th at all. That date was chosen by the Romans. Christmas was to replace a pagan festival of the same date. There is no real evidence to support these next few beliefs either. He was born in a stable. His parents spoke to an innkeeper. He was born in Bethlehem. Viking warriors are usually depicted with horns on either side of their helmets, but that's just a mad myth. It turns out the Vikings wore some pretty normal armor. The only problem, 19th century artists would depict Vikings with horned helmets. In those days, painters had no care for historical accuracy. They were terrible people. Having horns would add no value to a helmet, and it's a waste of good horn. Most Native Americans were not victims of genocide. A lot of natives were killed by European settlers. No one is denying that. But it was a low number compared to their greater population. It's thought there were 50 million natives before colonization. 90% were killed by diseases brought by settlers, to which they had no natural resistance. Of the remaining 5 million, many died in conflict with Europeans, but a lot of them interbred with white people. The average white American has some native blood today. Just for comparison, 90% of Native Americans died from plague, under 60% of Europeans died from the Black Death. African society wasn't primitive before European colonization. It's true that some parts of Africa were, but others were not. The Kingdom of Congo was independent from 1390 to 1891. It was an ordered society with diplomatic relations reaching other continents, and it was bordered by other organized kingdoms. Africa is a huge continent. There has always been wild variation in the advancement of its peoples. The Great War wasn't the bloodiest until that point. People think the First World War was bigger than any war before it. It was so big it was called the War to End All Wars. But there was a much more bloody war several decades earlier. Between 1850 and 1864, China was in civil war. A rebel group carved out their own kingdom within China. The Chinese government eventually defeated them, but it took a lot. 17 million died in the First World War. An estimated 20 to 30 million died in the Chinese Civil War. Some estimate up to 100 million died. Number 1 is the Holocaust. Now that's a joke. It's not the Holocaust. It's the idea that history is written by the winner. There are many examples of history being written by the losing side. An example is the Vietnam War. The narrative is dominated by American sources even today. In the 4th century BC, Athens lost their war to Sparta, but all reliable records of it come from their side. When Rome was ransacked by barbarians, I think we can guess which side wrote about it.